Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy here with you today, and we've got quite the show. We're going to talk Buckeyes. We're going to talk college football playoff. We're going to talk transfer portal. There's a lot to talk about on all of those areas, but let's start off with the beer of the day. And actually, it's been the beer of the last couple weeks. This North High Brewing Company, the lager, which conveniently is Ohio inspired, but also in scarlet and gray. So feels like a perfect beer to have during our show here. I want to get into the talk about the playoff first. We'll be joined by Bill Kurelic later to talk transfer portal for a little while, and it's going to be a big weekend for the Buckeyes. But to help me talk about the college football playoff, bringing in Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Bill, how are we doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I should have cracked open a beer. Is it too early? I've got a couple basketball games to go to with the kids this weekend. So, and we just got the Christmas tree ornaments on. Nice. This college football playoff has pushed Christmas prep back. I don't know about you.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, my fiance's family is doing Christmas the weekend of the playoff games, the first round games. And I told them, I was like, there's a chance. Now, my future sister-in-law and her husband are Penn State fans. They went to Penn State. So they also are playing that week, and they have season tickets. So this has become a whole thing. So I'm not exactly sure how that's going. But yes, it's definitely messed up some things in our household as well. But still, football and meaningful playoff football. So I think it'll work itself out. While we're on the topic, let's look at this Ohio State-Tennessee matchup first. We'll get to some of the other ones. But when this first came out, when the full bracket was released, was this the matchup you first looked at as probably the most intriguing?
Yeah, because it's that first time as somebody who grew up in Ohio, right? That, okay, now we got an SEC team coming up here.
Right.
In the cold, and it's supposed to be cold, in the snow, and it's supposed to be snowy. And it's a fan base that is every bit as passionate, and that would be what they would call each other, to be nice, passionate. They've probably got some other adjectives for each other going in. There'll be some orange up in the stadium. And I think with that rushing attack, with that defense, they pose a very interesting test for Ohio State in that they can't be hungover from Michigan. There can be it can't be any remnant of a hangover from Michigan, because this team has Dylan Sampson. They have a really good center. I was talking to you about earlier this morning. Cooper Mays, good interior line, good defense, and it's a talented team that'll be at Ohio Stadium. But we've always wanted to see how the weather factors in. We're going to find out right away.
I think the weather conversation is interesting, and I know this has been talked about over the last week, but like Tennessee isn't the South, right?
Right.
So they get some cold, they get some snow. I saw a picture that was going around from one of their special teams guys' Twitter account of those guys practicing out in the snow. But it could get colder than I think it does normally down there. How much do you think that's a factor in something like this, even though we haven't seen it much? You obviously are an NFL fan. We do see it at that level. What do you think the cold, potential snow, all that will impact in this game?
I don't think it impacts players as much as we want to believe who have actually played in this stuff. In the NFL, it rarely does. It's more, it affects the passing game. And if it's windy, that affects, I think coaches look at wind first, then cold, then rain, and, whatever San Francisco and the Rams were playing in for about a quarter and a half last night. I don't even know if that was rain. It looked like a monsoon, man. So I think, but just tackling and do you tackle well in that? Do you hold on? And Tennessee can run the football. So and they're not going to change what they can do. 232 yards per game. Dylan Sampson, I mentioned him, very good running back. For me, the key is this with Tennessee, how they respond to playing in front of 100,000 people. What is the mood of those 100,000 people? And is Nico Iamaleava, who was in total control the last time he played a Big Ten defense against Iowa, can Ohio State make him uncomfortable and force a couple turnovers? If they do, they'll be fine. But as far as a competitive game, I think this is one of two that we'll get in the first round. And I think this will be competitive. And I think Indiana, Notre Dame will be competitive. Not too sure about the other two.
You talk about that hangover from Michigan. When I look at that game, like I've told a lot of people this, when I look at this season as a whole, I see an Ohio State team that played a certain way for 11 games and then seemed to just clam up and completely change what they were doing for that Michigan game. And I think a lot of it has to do with the approach and Ryan Day and kind of the mental block that Michigan has become. Do you expect the Buckeyes to kind of get over that hangover, as you put it, and look more like the team we saw for those first 11 games, even in the loss at Oregon, considering this isn't a team that they have had issues with in the past? Don't even have much of a history, only one meeting all time.
Right. I think, that the hangover part is really interesting. I don't know the answer. I would guess that we're far enough removed from it that yes, they should just come out and play free. And that's one of the things I think I talked to you about it. I've talked to everybody about it in the last 3 weeks. I went to 3 Ohio State games this year. I went to Iowa, I went to Indiana, and I went to Michigan. And I just feel like the mood in that stadium is one of anxiety at all times. Even Iowa at halftime, it was, why aren't they running the ball? And why aren't they doing this? And why aren't we winning by 40 points? I think they just need to go out and there's no way to quantify this. Just go play free. You are a team that is talented enough to win the national championship. You've got the best safety in the country in Caleb Downs. You have a nasty front seven. Their defense played well. And you have enough talent on that offense, regardless of the injury to McLaughlin, to go out and win a national title. And I think it's just that anxiety and that you could feel it. I could feel it during the Indiana game. I could really feel it during Michigan, especially in the second half. And it was, I think that you can't say that it doesn't rub off on 18 to 22-year-old players when that happens.
Absolutely. And I think some of that has to do with the natty or bust conversation coming all the way back to almost a year ago in January, right? Like this team knew what was on the line from the start. And, we've seen teams that have that pressure, but a lot of them have had experienced success prior to that. And Ohio State really had it. I mean, 11 wins, 10 wins every year, certainly good, but they hadn't won a Big Ten title. They hadn't won a playoff game with this group. So I think it was a lot of pressure put on guys that hadn't always been in those pressure situations. And then now everyone's expecting you to go out and win every game by 60 points, right? And that just doesn't always happen. But I still think this team showed enough, I think, and I'm curious your opinion, for me to still have belief. And I know a lot of Buckeye fans have kind of dropped off after the Michigan game, and I think that'll pick back up as we get closer. But for me, this is still the team that, as you said, is talented enough to win a national championship. And I think the run that they will have to go on should be motivation enough with the teams that are on their schedule here in the potential playoff matchups that go out and prove what you can do, right? This is your opportunity to show, we are the best team in the country, even though we lost 2 games.
Well, there's no dominant team. That's my big thing. There's no team where I think there are 6, maybe 7 teams that could win the whole thing. And I can tell you that each one of them has a flaw. Oregon probably the least flaws, but there's a lot of pressure in going out and maybe beating Ohio State a second time. And, they've relied on their defense in a couple games. They had some trouble at Wisconsin. That was their blip. Texas, will Quinn Ewers not turn the ball over and have an efficient game in a big game against a really good defense? Georgia, who's the quarterback? Notre Dame, their best wins are Army and Navy. I think they're really good. I think they're capable, but they haven't played a heavyweight all season. Right. Ohio State, the Michigan hangover, and can Will Howard be that guy in this tournament, playoff tournament, whatever you want to call it, shake off the Michigan game and lead this team. And then I think the other 3 are fringe: Penn State, Tennessee, and I'm going to lump Arizona State in as a courtesy. They were playing as well as anybody at the end of the season. Do I think they can win 3 playoff games? No. But when the field's that wide open, sure, Ohio State absolutely could win this thing.
As we talk about matchups, you mentioned the run game already in this one. I think it'll be interesting to see what Ohio State does. Ryan Day talked about needing to get the ball on the perimeter more in that Michigan game. Ohio State's run game was good all year, not great, but good. And obviously the offensive line injuries have affected things. But I think that it comes down to who can move the ball on the ground. Whatever the weather conditions are going to be, whether you can throw the ball or not, I think Ohio State has to be able to run the ball better than it did those last 2 games against Indiana and Michigan, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that needs to happen. And I don't know, maybe more creative in the running game. I know a lot was made of running right at Michigan, but there were some concepts. There was one play in that Michigan game. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what the terminology for the running play would be, but it was Travion got loose on it. And I kind of like the concept that they ran there. Chip Kelly probably has a special word for it, whatever, or it could just be a counter. But, I mean, some creativity trying to get to the edge off the tackles with Travion and Quinshon. You need a running game in the playoff. There's no question. And Tennessee, they are good up front. You can't get in 3rd and long. They have James Pierce. If you haven't watched James Pierce play, he is a Sunday player. He's probably a first-round top 10 pick type player. And, it's all the same things I said about Nico. Or I would go for Will Howard. You can't have a turnover here. You can have one. And we focus so much. We do focus a lot on Will Howard doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but when he makes them, they are highly visible. Is that a fair way to put it? It was like that at Penn State as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that I said about Will Howard is when he turns the ball over, if he turns the ball over, it can't be in a crucial situation, like the Penn State situation set them up for a touchdown immediately. That was bad, right? You almost throw an interception on that first drive in Oregon. You have that fumble, as you're driving, just having a turnover doesn't necessarily hurt you if you can get the ball right back. You don't like it, but it's at least manageable. It just kind of depends. The Michigan one, the first one against Michigan, obviously sets Michigan up on the doorstep, and that's a killer, especially in a tight game like that. So,
well, you're around the team too. Let me ask you this: do you think if you were attacking Tennessee, I'll play reporter since I've done it for a while.
Let's do it.
Would you attack them with the tempo and the receivers? And that's what they didn't do against Michigan either. Go fast. Go fast with those receivers. Try to get out to a quick lead. Get the crowd into it. And once the crowd's into it, night game, Columbus, been there, done that. It's a tough place to win at night.
Yeah.
That's what I would do. I mean, trust your quarterback, trust those guys on the outside.
Yeah, I think you definitely have to have a better mix of tempo. And that was one of the most frustrating things watching the Michigan game was like going into halftime, you're 10-10. It's not a great first half, but it looked like you found something there going quick with the 2-minute drill. And I get why, Ryan Day's talked about it all year. They like that they can huddle now with Will Howard, an experienced guy. He gets the communication from Chip Kelly. Then he can talk to everybody, make sure everything's set. But yeah, I think you can be more diverse in terms of tempo, not tempo. I think back to the New England Patriot teams, and obviously Bill Belichick in the news right now. But I think back when they had Randy Moss and those teams, the way they mixed tempo in, and Tom Brady knew exactly when, hey, we're gonna go. And then there were times to slow it down and just, hey, let's make sure we've got everything set here. There are certain plays that, you want to make sure guys are in the right spot. They know their responsibilities. And so I think that's going to be important for this team to kind of have a nice mix. And I think they did a pretty good job of that most of the season. I think a lot of fans would like to see more tempo just because it leads to more scoring and it's more exciting. But I also understand Ryan Day's explanation of why he wants to slow things down at times. What do you make of this defense? You mentioned the defensive line. In watching Tennessee, for me, the linebackers you can get after a little bit, especially now that they've had some injuries. I think the secondary is very good, but gives up some stuff underneath. What has been your assessment of kind of where Ohio State might be able to attack besides the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, that you got to get inside, get that running game going inside. They are aggressive, and they have that combination of top 5 defense, top 5 offense. They're physical point of attack and played SEC teams. And I mentioned Pierce earlier, really good player. Their secondary is fast, but again, you got to hit them with tempo. I think Georgia had success going tempo with Carson Beck against them, working the middle of the field with the tight ends. Crossing routes seemed to work in that game quite a bit. And then you go back to Arkansas. I'm going to be honest, I didn't see a lot of the Arkansas game because I was at that Ohio State-Iowa game. Yeah. I got home. That was after Alabama had lost to Vanderbilt. And then I'm like, now what? That was that night. I was like, my wife just kind of waved at me. She's like, I guess you'll be up at like 4 a.m. And I was like, yeah, that's where this night's going. Because I didn't watch enough of that game. But Tennessee, when they played Alabama, the athlete part isn't going to be a problem. They have 4- and 5-star guys. They've recruited well under Heupel. They have a unique offensive system. I think on the other side, that I think Ohio State, I don't think this will be a shootout. It still feels like 28-24, 28-21 type game, but it could become one.
Yeah, absolutely.
If Ohio State has the success in the passing game, and then Tennessee, because I know with Josh Heupel, despite the fact that they've become this kind of run-heavy, gritty team that resembles their 1998 team in a lot of ways, the one that won their last national title, they're going to chuck it down the field a little bit. They will test Ohio State's secondary on the corner, and they'll let Nico take a couple shots. I'm just interested to see when, because of coming into the environment and I did check the weather, and I hate to keep harping on it, but it did say snow, and I'm just like, gross. But good in a good way if you're, a Ohio State fan. I just go back to that Michigan game. I was wondering, I remember after Ryan Day said the wind impacted the game a little bit. Maybe it did throwing the ball down the field. I think Ohio State, one of my criticisms of that, maybe not a criticism, but just an observation, they did not throw a pass of 20 yards or more. They did, I believe it was the 2 PI calls.
Right.
Am I right about that? It was just the 2 times they drew a PI on Jeremiah. You got to take shots to Jeremiah down the field in this game.
Yeah. And I think you've got to use all 3 of those receivers, right? You talked about, attacking with tight ends, and maybe they do get some, G. Scott involved and things like that. But, Emeka Egbuka in the slot over the middle, you can hit that all day. I mean, obviously Carnell Tate had the big drop at the end of the Michigan game, but that's a player who under the radar could kind of announce himself if he could have a good college football playoff run. And then, everyone knows what Jeremiah Smith can do. Now, most of that game, Michigan did a good job defensively with him. I think Ohio State did try to take those shots, as you mentioned, that led to the 2 PI calls. I know Steve Hellwagon was pointing out, and he did so to Ryan Day in the press conference, why not take shots to a guy like that once you get in the red zone, which they did not do. I'd have to go back and look at the coverage on those, but that sometimes dictates it. But also, you got to get the ball in these guys' hands. They're just too good to not be involved.
Well, that's the strength. It's the strength of the team. And when you watch Ohio State, is one of the puzzling things from that, not to keep harping on the Michigan game, was Michigan's team strength was those 2 guys in the middle of the interior defensive line. Mason Graham's going to be on a lot of All-American lists. He's going to be a first-round pick. Kenneth Grant, first-round pick. Ohio State, to me, the Sunday for a decade guys, and they've got a lot of guys that are going to play on Sunday. Jeremiah Smith's going to play for a long time. Carnell Tate's going to play for a long time. Emeka's probably going to play for a long time. He, if anything, just a route running specialist. He's so good at running routes. Got to get the ball to these guys in this game. And, again, I just think the first quarter is going to be so important from a set the tone standpoint. You're going to hear that a lot. I do think I did pay attention. I don't know if it was a press conference yesterday, I apologize, but Ross Bjork's comments did hit me. Yes, I did see them. And I think of course he's got to make those comments about Ryan Day. I don't think this game is a Ryan Day stays or go game, unless you've heard something different. I do think he'll be back next year no matter what. This playoff will determine the temperature of what that offseason is. I always tell people, as you know, I don't brag about them, but I talk about my kids a lot. And, my son's out, and I'm around all these dads on lacrosse fields all summer, and you hear they want to talk about Ohio State all the time. This will determine the temperature of those conversations among the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. As you look at the rest of the field, you mentioned the Notre Dame Indiana game. What jumps out at you about that one, and maybe a couple of these other first round matchups? Kind of how do you see things going?
Yeah, I think Indiana and Notre Dame will be competitive, and if Indiana can run the ball, they could not run the ball in Michigan. They could not run the ball in Ohio State. If they can't run the ball against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's able to get pressure on Curtis Rourke, he'll make mistakes. I think that game's going to pan out a little bit like Louisville Notre Dame did. A 1-score competitive game. Notre Dame probably wins. I think it's fun. I don't like Clemson's chances at Texas. I don't. I think Texas, if they're able to run the ball in that game, it's going to be a long night for Clemson. And I actually think Penn State's going to handle SMU. I'm wondering if SMU gets a touch of that Cinderella feel that you need to make this work going up to Happy Valley. But that's a tough assignment. And James Franklin, for all that we criticize him about, only one loss as a favorite the last 3 years, and that was to Ole Miss in a bowl game where some guys didn't play. So that's my way of telling you the chalk gets through the first round. And I think 2 games that will make or break this bracket and determine everything. And this might be like, well, no kidding, Billy. Thanks for this. But Ohio State-Oregon rematch, I think will be just, we saw it once. It was an epic game the first time. Now you get it on a neutral site. Rose Bowl, right? That's amazing right there that you get to play that game in the Rose Bowl and they go at it for a chance at the semifinals. The other one, Georgia-Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame wins. If Notre Dame can beat Georgia, finally beat an SEC school, show they have things on the perimeter, that also would mean that Georgia's quarterback situation didn't work out, and then you get into that. So, to me, I still pick Georgia to win. My semis would be, right now, Oregon, Georgia, Penn State, Texas, SEC Big Ten Invitational. I think that's probably what it's going to be no matter what, some sort of SEC Big Ten Invitational, unless Notre Dame can push their way in.
What do you make of then this has obviously been a topic of conversation across the country these last couple of weeks, but just the format of this with the buys and everything. What's your take on kind of how this is all shaped up and maybe what it looks like going forward?
Well, I like the 12. That's fine. Yeah. I like the games on campus. That's great. I don't like how we're seeding them. If you just seed them how the committee seeded them, it's such a better reflection of what we watched. You would get, and I've talked this through all week. So 1, Oregon, 2, Georgia, 3, Texas, 4, Penn State. That's fine. Now let's do the first round matchups. If it were that format, you get 5, Notre Dame, 12, Clemson. Yeah, that looks good. 6, Penn State, 11, or no, not Penn State, 6. It was
Ohio State,
11, Arizona State. I'm still good.
Fine,
I like it. 7 was who's the other at large? 8, 9 was Indiana Boise.
Yeah.
Which looks like an 8-9 game, in my opinion. So that leaves, who do I have playing SMU in the 7-10 game? It's Tennessee.
Yeah, Tennessee.
Tennessee, SMU. Those matchups are so much better to me.
Yeah.
You get Arizona State coming up to Ohio Stadium. And yeah, they don't like it, but then you match them up and the playoff paths look more reasonable. My biggest nitpick with what we've got is Oregon has to play Ohio State in the second round, probably. That's not – they're going to happen, but Penn State's going through SMU and Boise State. They're going to be favored by more than 8 points in both of those games, and they lost the Big Ten championship game. If you seed these teams properly, then this thing works. We can still do the automatic berths. That's fine. We can still put 4 Big Ten teams and 3 SEC teams in. That's fine too. But let's do this correctly. So that's how we do it in basketball. Why wouldn't we do it in football? So let's do that part. I hope they tweak that part.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me they really wanted to reward the conference champions more than just you get in, right? And I don't know if that worked the way that they thought it was going to.
Well, I know, and a friend of both of ours, Tom Orr, tweeted something that I was paying attention on that Saturday. And Tom tweeted out a top 12 that looked reasonable, and it said this would be reasonable. And I agreed with all of it. But what the committee did that was different was they put Penn State and Georgia, or Penn State and Texas, they rewarded them. They didn't penalize them for playing in the conference championship game. So you put them 5-6. How I would have stacked 5-8 was I had it at Notre Dame 5, Texas 6, Ohio State 7, Penn State 8. Because I honored the head-to-head in the regular season.
Yeah.
Ohio State won at Penn State. Ohio State played Oregon closer. I understand why they put Penn State in there. But had we seeded these teams better, then I would be more on board with what we're watching, because that's the part where I'm like, Penn State lost both of their big games, and now they've got what most people consider the easiest path out of the first round higher seeds.
Yeah, yeah. I had a friend suggest the other day, instead of having that rankings show on ESPN every Tuesday, put together a video of the College Football Playoff Committee having their discussion. Make that public. Let people hear what people are saying. They were like, I think that would do better ratings than a rankings reveal show each week that don't really tell you anything. And I was like, they will never do that, but that's interesting. Like, I think people would tune in and watch and, okay, who's saying what? And, does Ward Manuel, the Michigan AD, hate Ohio State? Things like that I think would be interesting. I get that they will never do it, but I do think that would be fun. That would be fun.
And I think, you reward in general. I don't know if we talked about SMU Alabama. I was cool with that.
Yeah.
I was good. I've answered that question so many times in the past week. I might as well do it one more time. They honored SMU's regular season accomplishments by going undefeated in their conference. And they didn't give Alabama the benefit of the doubt. And I think the biggest game for me was Oklahoma. Again, I think I got back from the shoe, watched that. I'm like, what are they doing? They don't look like Alabama at all. And you can excuse it as playing at Oklahoma. It was tough. It was senior night. No, they looked very ordinary. And they lost 3 road games, and they lost them all in the conference. So, and then the threat of, well, we're going to change our scheduling. You know what? I don't really care how teams non-con schedule. I'm really happy Ohio State's playing Texas to start next year. I was happy to go up and watch Michigan play Texas this year. That was a fun game. It wasn't fun for Michigan. It was a fun game to go to, though. For the, wow, Texas is up here. Cool. I don't care. I mean, you've got to, the wins and losses have to count. And I think Ohio State in general, this year's non-con was bad, but in general, they are good about stepping out and playing one big one.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see if those continue given kind of what the committee has done. But I think you want people to come out to your stadium. Well, you got to have one of those games, right? I mean, trust me, covering those 3 non-conference games for Ohio State those first 3 weeks was just brutal. And I can understand why fans would be like, I'm doing anything else, and I'll watch the highlights later than watching them beat up on, Marshall or whoever it is.
Well, they scheduled Texas last year as an appetizer for the Bobcats game, of course.
Yeah,
when they play my Ohio Bobcats, who are fresh off, as I have to mention, fresh off their first MAC championship forever, and then we lose our coach. But, I've been to 2 of those, and I went to the Ohio State OU game in like 1999, and it was so much fun. Like just going in the green, and it was tied at half, and then Kenyon Rambo went off. But I will tell you this, the guys that I lived with in college that were Ohio Bobcats guys, they were so excited to play in that game. And I am looking forward to that as a MAC guy that likes my Bobcats. But I think the Texas game will have a few more television viewers. Just a few.
Yeah. That OU game will be interesting in the press box because there are quite a few of you Bobcats in there. I was almost a Bobcat myself. We'll have to see if you guys are cheering.
Jerry's going to have to tell us to pipe down in the press box in the first half. There's at least 6 of us up there for sure.
Yeah. You go sit on that other side, the away side for that game.
Yeah, they might put us over there.
Right. All right, Bill. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your insight, and I will see you next weekend, I believe.
Hey, no problem. Yeah, I'll be right. You're right above me in the press box. Can't wait. Thank you so much for having me on. Take care. Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too. See you, Bill. And speaking of Bills, we are going to transition into our transfer portal, maybe a little recruiting talk with Bill Kurelic of Bucknuts, my coworker. Bill, how are we doing today?
Doing well. What's going on next weekend, by the way?
Yeah, it'll be a big weekend on campus, but I don't know if it will be as big recruiting wise. Actually, let's start with that because I know people have asked you about that. What are the rules for Ohio State in terms of recruiting on a college football playoff home game day?
Well, let's start with this weekend. This is a quiet period. That means that recruits can be on campus. So Ohio State will have players. They do have, I should say, players, recruits on campus this weekend. Now, fast forward to what you asked about specifically next weekend. Basically, the same rules are in effect. It is a quiet period. So recruits can be on campus. Now, the difference is, and by the way, transfer portal kids can be making official visits. And like Josh Thompson, the Northwestern offensive lineman, is making an official visit to Ohio State today as one example. So next weekend, it is a quiet period still. But the difference being is that we now have home playoff games. First time well, I think in the history of college football, I believe, but certainly since I've been doing this, and that's not quite the history of college football, but it's a long time. It changes a little bit with a home playoff game. it's not like an in-season home game where you can have recruits there. They can be on unofficial visits. They can they get free tickets to the game. Their high school coaches get free tickets to the game. It's not like that. A home playoff game, you can have recruits there. You can have high school kids there, for instance. You could have a transfer portal kid there. But they are not allowed to, that is, Ohio State or anybody else hosting a home playoff game is not allowed to provide free tickets to the high school recruits or their high school coaches. Now, does that mean that a high school recruit could not be at Ohio State next Saturday on an unofficial visit and then go to the game? Well, no, it doesn't mean that. He can go to the game. It's just that he's got to find his own ticket, purchase it himself. There's not a recruiting section, so to speak, where all the kids sit in the recruiting section and get free tickets and watch the game. If they're going to go to that game, that's totally on their own. They could be up in C deck, and they would have to pay for the ticket. So that's the difference.
We'll get to the guys visiting this weekend that you mentioned a second ago. But first, I want to ask if you're kind of ranking Ohio State's positions that they are trying to hit in the transfer portal the hardest, what are the most important ones that Ohio State has really dived in already as the portal opened? What is it, four days ago?
Well, it'd be offensive line, followed by offensive line, followed by offensive line, and then followed by offensive line. I think those would be the top four. Now, I somewhat jest, but there's no doubt about it. It's offensive line at the very top. They need some plug-and-play guys. At least I think they need at least one, if not two. Three wouldn't be bad. At least three guys. Maybe not all of them come in and start right away, but for depth purposes and all that. We've seen this year how important depth is on the offensive line. Wouldn't you like to have back the offensive line that started the season right now with Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin? That would be tremendous. And they kind of did a pretty good job of filling one open line spot. They just moved Donovan Jackson out to tackle and put Hinsman in at guard. But when that second offensive line spot came open, McLaughlin, that's where it's got a little dicey. And I don't know about you, but I don't know for sure who's going to be the guy that moves into the starting lineup next weekend.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I have no idea.
But getting back to the question, offensive line is the big spot. Now, if you kind of look at where they've got guys coming in to visit or want to ask or ask guys, talk to guys about visit, that kind of thing, I think you'd have to put secondary as the next area. Dylan Thieneman, who I know you are very familiar with.
Yep.
The safety from Purdue. He's going to make an official visit to Ohio State. They've also definitely reached out to Mansour Delane and shown interest in him, and there's mutual interest. His brother is Fahim Delane, who's coming in. He'll be here in January as one of the top 2025 players in the country. He is also a safety. And then they've reached out to a few other guys too. So I think you'd have to put secondary right now as the number 2 spot. Although if you look at the defensive line, they're looking at guys there too. In fact, James Williams from Nebraska is a guy that I expect will make an official visit to Ohio State. And they certainly are interested in him. And then they've got a running back on campus. Actually, he flew up to Columbus yesterday. He is from he's at USC. That's who he's played for the last 2 seasons. And I put played for in air quotes because his freshman season, he redshirted. He's out of the class of 2023, Quentin Joyner. He's a running back again at USC. And he was in the class of 2023. He went to Manor High School in Manor, Texas. Signed with USC and did not play his first year, redshirted. And this year he did play. He played a reasonable amount for USC, and he is making it a visit to Ohio State. Like I said, he flew up to get things started. He flew up to Columbus yesterday, but expected that the bulk of the visit will be today.
Yeah, Joyner's an interesting one because you look at his numbers for the season, 478 yards and 3 touchdowns, like doesn't jump out at you. But then you kind of look at his game log. Well, he had 83 yards against Notre Dame. He had 82 yards against Penn State, the touchdown there. Had a big game early in one of their non-conference games, but did have some good games. And USC obviously rotated the backs. And I've had a couple people ask me already, like, why do you think they're going after a running back? And I don't think it's an indictment on what they have in the room. I think they know they're going to lose TreVeyon Henderson. They probably expect to lose Quinshon Judkins, though stranger things have happened. And I think you just probably want kind of a more veteran guy than the 2 guys that will be second-year players next year, and then the freshman coming in. Is that your read as well?
Yeah, I don't think if you expect to compete for a Big Ten championship and national championship, and that's pretty much always the expectation at Ohio State. There's not a year where, well, we're a little bit down this year, so maybe we'll finish 4th in the Big Ten. That doesn't quite cut it.
No.
So if you expect to challenge for a Big Ten and national championship, to go into the season with basically no real experience at running back, and I know James Peoples has played some as example.
And they like
him. Yeah, but
like him a lot.
Yeah, but do you have any experience there? Real experience of being in the fire against Michigan, against Oregon? No, not really. Mm-hmm. So I think the thing is you need somebody with some game experience to kind of lead the cause. And as you mentioned, that James Peoples is going to be a good running back for Ohio State. He just hadn't played yet a lot.
Right. Well, and I also think they found something they liked this year in the way that they rotated TreVeyon Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. And I think if you can have a similar thing next year with whether it be Joyner or another more veteran running back and James Peoples, and maybe you mix in Sam Williams-Dixon some too, now you've got guys maybe staying healthy longer. And look, I think Ohio State's position on the transfer portal has changed. I mean, I remember listening to the Ryan Day, Kirby Smart press conference before they played in the playoff semifinal, where we were talking about how like these weren't teams that went out and got guys in the transfer portal. Most of the roster, the vast majority of the roster were on both teams were guys recruited out of high school. And I think if you're Ohio State and you're looking at the roster next year, you do not want to end up with what happened with Michigan. Like regardless of how this playoff goes, if you win a national championship, you're losing a lot of guys. And I don't think you can afford to then have a step back year like Michigan did this season. Obviously the game aside, but I think that you're just looking at all positions. Can we find something that's maybe a little bit more veteran and gives us a chance to compete right away again next year, as opposed to maybe something that's less for sure? Even though I think they believe in talent. You talked about Thieneman in the secondary. Like they have some good safeties, but this is a 2-time All-American or All Big Ten safety. He was a freshman All-American. Like you can't pass a guy like that up, right? So I think they've just changed their approach. Real quick, Cheryl asked, is Judkins in the portal? No, but in all likelihood, he is going to declare for the NFL draft once the season is over. Again, stranger things have happened, but I expect Judkins to be gone after the season. And I'm just, I don't know anything. I'm not reporting anything, but that seems likely given what he's done in his career. Bill, you mentioned.
And also, as you've pointed out, Pat, why would you, if Judkins is for sure coming back, and then you've got the other guys, plus you've got Bo Jackson coming in as a 2025 guy. You got Isaiah West coming in, and then you got Turbo Rogers. Why would you need a guy like Quinton Joyner if you know for sure Quinshon Judkins is coming back? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because you have your experience there in Quinshon Judkins if he were to come back, and then you have some experience in James People, and then you have some really talented guys coming in too.
Exactly. And I just think, again, Ohio State's philosophy has shifted. They know they need to win every year, and they realize that, yes, it's not going to be full on Colorado in the transfer portal, but the numbers are probably going to increase. And I don't think they're as worried about recruiting over some guys at this point if they feel like they can get a significant upgrade. You mentioned.
Go ahead. And by the way, Turbo Rogers, Yeah, he's coming in as a multi-dimensional guy. He's coming in as a slot guy, can work out of the backfield, all that. And I don't know that they have a guy on the roster right now that does exactly. I think the closest one would be the freshman Sam Williams-Dixon. And Turbo Rogers, he's a great talent. So it'll be interesting to see if they incorporate that and he can actually get on the field as a true freshman.
Well, Ryan Day compared him to, at least role-wise, to some of what they did with, the name just slipped my mind. Xavier, what was this? 2 years ago. Xavier
Johnson?
Yes.
Johnson,
Yeah, who was a walk-on receiver, running back, had spent time kind of all over the place and was able to line up in the backfield, was able to, do some things as a receiver. And so now you have a guy coming in, you mentioned Sam Williams-Dixon, you have that. You have a guy coming in Rogers, who both scholarship guys that they like that maybe can do some of that. That again, you're right. They didn't have that kind of guy and probably didn't really need that kind of guy this year, given you had the receivers and the running backs that you did have. Let's go back to the guys visiting this weekend. You've mentioned a few of them, but recap, if you will, for the people listening, who will be on campus this weekend, what they play, all that kind of stuff.
Well, Josh Thompson, that one's huge. Offensive lineman who has been a really good offensive lineman for Northwestern. He started the last couple seasons, he's played left tackle at he's played left guard at Northwestern. He's played right guard at Northwestern. He's played right tackle. He played the last 11 games of this past season at right tackle, and was very good. He is a guy that is very coveted. He's already visited Michigan State and Auburn, visited them this week. He is at Ohio State today. He will visit Michigan, Tennessee, and South Carolina before making his decision. At least that's how things stand at this moment. And, it's pretty wide open. Everything's going to come down to his visits. I think a lot of people thought initially Michigan might have the inside track because he is from Fenton, Michigan originally. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's, from everything I'm hearing, is that it's really going to come down to how each visit goes and what how he feels at each school and how they're going to use him and so on and so forth. So that's huge. That's a huge, huge visit. Mentioned Quentin Joyner, the running back from USC, is visiting this weekend. Isaiah World could be visiting this weekend. That's not a definite. He is visiting Texas A&M today. He's a 6'8", 315-pound tackle from Nevada, who's had two good seasons at Nevada. He was honorable mention all conference, the only player on the Nevada team to do that. And he is going to visit to Ohio State. He tells me it's not clear as of a day or so ago. It wasn't clear if it would be this weekend, maybe Monday, Tuesday, exactly when that was going to be. But, maybe he makes it in this weekend. We'll see. And then you've got the high school kid, Jackson Cantwell, the country's #1 offensive tackle for the class of 2026. He's visiting Ohio State tomorrow on Saturday, and then Michigan on Sunday. That will complete all of his visits to that will mean he has been to all of the approximate 10 schools that he is still considering for official visits. He has 30 plus scholarship offers. He basically is looking now at 10 schools. He's been to all of them except Ohio State and Michigan. He'll visit those 2 schools this weekend and then decide on 3 to 5 schools that he will likely take official visits to spring, summer, probably more towards summer.
The offensive line obviously has been a big topic, and we've touched on it a little bit here. What is your perception of Ohio State's offensive line recruiting? And I know you get asked about this a lot in your chats and stuff that you do, but just how do you think how does Ohio State handle it? Maybe why have things not worked out for some of the guys that they've looked for? And do you see things shifting at all right now, given kind of the way things have gone in the last couple of years?
Well, I think because Ohio State has struggled in one area in particular, that the whole perception is they've struggled completely on offensive line recruiting. And I don't go along with that totally or at all, really, that they've totally struggled, because portal wise, they've done pretty well. I mean, bringing in Seth McLaughlin, I believe he was the Remington Award winner, if I'm not mistaken. Best center in the country. They brought him in. That's a pretty good recruiting job right there. Josh Simmons, they brought him in, and he has developed until he got injured. He was going to be a 2-year starter until he got injured, developed into at least a second-round NFL draft choice and maybe a first-round NFL draft choice. So, and you can go back far that, but they have not struck out on the portal. They've been able to bring in some pretty good players. They haven't hit on all of them. Who will forget the infamous Victor Cutler, for instance, that they brought in? Didn't quite make it, but they really have, done pretty well portal wise. You get two guys like Simmons and McLaughlin, that's a good job. So portal wise, they've done fine, done okay at the very minimum. Ohio high school wise, they've done okay. They got Carter Lowe this year, the one of the top offensive tackles in the country, and they have done a pretty decent job in Ohio. They've got now. Will some of the guys that they really targeted pan out? We don't know for sure. A good example was the 2024 class. Michigan took 2 or 3 guys in Ohio that Ohio State didn't think were going to be great players, that they weren't Ohio State guys necessarily. Instead, Ohio State took, for instance, the 2 twins, the Armstrong twins. Mm-hmm. It's only going to be a matter of time till we find out who was right on that. Did the Armstrong twins turn out to be great players, or do those couple 2-3 guys that went to Michigan turn out to be great players? But the point is, Ohio State got the guys they wanted. It wasn't that they struck out. Now, we'll just have to see if their evaluations were right. So where they have come up really struggling is to get the top out-of-state high school guys. They got Ian Moore, and I really think he's going to turn out to be a good one. But for the most part, they haven't been able to land 2, 3, 4 really high-level out-of-state offensive linemen each year. That hasn't worked out, and I don't have an answer for that. Why they haven't been able to do that. Justin Fry, a very personal guy. It just hasn't worked out. And, that's where Ohio State needs to do a better job. They need to be able to go out of state, because you're not going to fill all your needs with multiple high-level guys from Ohio every single year.
Yeah, I wonder if instead of maybe trying to get the David Sanders Jr.'s, for instance. I mean, you have to get in on that, right? Because he's a 5-star kid and the best tackle in the country. But I wonder if you take more of a Wisconsin, once you get the numbers you need, and if you're going to supplement in the transfer portal, you take more of a Wisconsin approach to things where, like, let's go get these guys that maybe they're not 5-star guys, but like the 4-star, 3-star guys, big guys that we can really develop into things. And especially if you believe in Justin Fry's ability to develop, which I think is still up in the air. I think that, you have to give him time to work with these guys. And maybe, you put more eggs in the basket of those type of guys that could still turn into really good players, whether that be Ohio or, the Midwest in general. There's also the NIL factor, right, Bill, that, you only have the NIL isn't an unlimited budget. And obviously things are changing every year with revenue sharing coming and stuff like that. But, you basically, if it's a pie, you're slotting positions in based on, how much you can spend on each spot. And I do wonder if maybe that assessment changes, especially when we're talking about portal linemen who, are more proven. I know Ohio State's been a little bit hesitant to give a lot of money to an unproven guy coming out of high school in general, not even just on the offensive line. Do you think that maybe the NIL money starts to shift a bit more towards offensive linemen to get those guys in the door?
Well, several things that you brought up. Number one, I can say with a lot of confidence that if they bring in the Wisconsin type 3-star, maybe 4, low 4-star Ohio State fans are not going to be happy with that.
That's fair.
Now, it may prove out to work out really well, but Ohio State fans pretty much, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm just saying it's they want 4- and 5-star guys at every position. So, I could see that, you'd really have to develop those guys. And to some extent, a little bit, they may have done that. I think an example would be this year, Javon McFadden. He's a 4-star guy, depending on what rankings you look, or he's a high 3-star guy, low 4-star, high 3-star guy. And I think he's got a chance to be a pretty good player. I think that's kind of the type of guy you're referring to, that maybe the Wisconsins of the world, would that be a good get for them?
Yeah.
Does McFadden turn into be a really good offensive lineman? Only time will tell. So they have done that a little bit, but Ohio State fans maybe won't be quite thrilled with that.
Yeah.
Until, of course, the kid turns into be a really good player, perhaps.
Yeah. And real quick, I'm not suggesting that you do only that. I just think if you're trying, you look at the number situation, right? Like at tackle right now, they're just not, there's not enough bodies in terms of what they would like to have. I think you've got 8-ish, 9-ish guys when you'd probably like to have 11, 12. So, yes, you still need to go and get some of those top guys, and no doubt about that. I don't want to let anybody off the hook, but I think you can, continue to get some of the guys that you're talking about and maybe pull from that group, based on your assessment. Obviously, Ohio State isn't necessarily looking at our rankings and recruiting based on that. So, look, I know that they're going to go after the best guys they can, regardless of, where they're from or whatnot. But maybe you have a bit more success looking in the Midwest and trying to, repeat some of the other program's success on the offensive line while supplementing with those top guys or transfer portal guys, I guess is my suggestion.
And, they have, over the past 5 years or less, they have brought in I'll give you a couple of, Enoch Vimahi. He was Army at that time it was called the Army All-American Bowl. He was an Army All-American Bowl selection. He was in the Army All-American Bowl. There was high hopes for him. It didn't work out. So that was a pretty highly rated out-of-state guy that they did get, just didn't work out. And Carson Hinsman, he played in the Army All-American Bowl too. Yeah. So they have done it to some extent. You just got to make, offensive linemen are not the easiest thing to evaluate and make sure they work out. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And now to the NIL part of things, I think that's a good point. I think that, I could find people that would say, that Ohio State needs to kind of relook at, how much money they are giving out for wide receivers, for instance, as opposed to offensive linemen. I think that's a valid point. Are they spending enough money on high school offensive linemen, NIL money, as compared to, say, quarterback, wide receiver, et cetera? I think in Ryan Day's system, you got to have the quarterbacks and you pretty much have to have the wide receivers, but maybe you try to find a way somehow, some way to allocate more money for offensive linemen. And if I'm not mistaken, Pat, I think I think hopefully you can tell me this is right. I think Ryan Day brought up the concept of taking a look at how much money we're allocating for offensive linemen.
Yeah. And I think, especially given the background of Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and the NFL experience, I do wonder if they take a look at kind of how teams that have been successful in the NFL, be the Kansas City Chiefs, the San Francisco 49ers, those are two teams that played in the Super Bowl last year and have had a lot of success, how they use the money in their salary cap, right? Like, obviously the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but the 49ers are doing it with Brock Purdy, who will get paid here at some point in time. But, have had a lot of success, both teams, because they're strong up front on both sides of the ball. And, I don't know what the numbers are, but I have to imagine that's where a decent section of that salary cap goes to. Now, you're Ohio State, you're built to throw the ball. And I think this was what was so frustrating about the Michigan game is you have these weapons. You didn't use them to the way that I think people expected. And so, yes, you're built a little differently. And I don't think you need to go away from that entirely, and you still want to land top receivers, top running backs, top quarterbacks. But I do think that, maybe there's a way to balance it a little bit better. Tough to say, though, because it's not like the NFL where we know what guys are making, right? The NIL stuff, we don't know what they're offering guys. There's reports out there and whatnot, but it's tough to judge exactly. But I do think you're right. Ryan Day, without saying it, I think made reference to the fact that they do need to kind of evaluate how they're doing things with the offensive line recruiting and development. And, does that mean Justin Fry? Does that mean NIL? Does that mean, focusing on where you're turning your attention in recruiting? I guess we'll have to wait and see specifically on that, because I don't think they're going to reveal it. But, certainly going to be important going forward, no doubt about it. All right, Bill, I appreciate you taking time to do this. I think we touched on a lot of topics, and I think people are better for listening to you, not me.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure about it at all, but I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks, Bill. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a great weekend.
You too. All right. Thanks to both Bills, Bill Bender from the Sporting News and Bill Kurelic from our own Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports for jumping on. Crazy time this time of year. If you think about it, the season ends, the regular season ends, you have conference championship games, and then less than a week later, you have signing day. And then less than a week after that, the college football playoff rankings are announced, or the college football playoff brackets announced. Less than a week after that, the transfer portal opens. And so, it's not everybody is busy at this time of year. And I can't imagine being a coach in college football trying to balance all this stuff, especially if you are a team like Ohio State. If you're Oregon or Penn State, for instance, who just played in the Big Ten championship game, it's nuts. It's nuts, guys. They got to figure out a better way to deal with the schedule. I saw a couple of questions that I wanted to answer real quick, both from Sue. She asked, will we finally talk to Chip Kelly this week? Man, I hope so. No, we actually will. So the way that this week will work, this upcoming week leading into the game, instead of having Ohio State's normal week, it's basically run like a bowl week would be. Say Ohio State was just playing in the Rose Bowl this week. We would fly out there. We would have interviews with the offense one day for one team, the defense that same day. Then it switches. You get coordinators, you get coaches. Sometimes there's a media day. I'm sure you guys are at least somewhat aware of all this. So basically what they're doing for this first round of games is they basically mandate the teams have that same type of availability. So let me see if I can find this schedule here and tell you exactly what it will look like. But yes, to answer your question, both coordinators will have to speak this week. They will. Here it is. Both coordinators have to speak. So we will finally get an opportunity to talk to Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles. I have been advocating for those two to speak well before this time, because I think, especially in the case of Chip Kelly, there's going to be a lot of questions about the Michigan game as you're trying to now talk about the college football playoff and a first round game against Tennessee. But people want to know about what went wrong. And we haven't talked to him. For some reason, Chip Kelly didn't talk after the game. And that was instead put on Ryan Day, who I think should have talked, Will Howard and Cody Simon. I think that Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles both should have had to answer questions after the Michigan game. But they didn't. I think that next week, Ohio State didn't do anything in terms of getting coordinators out there. There's probably some reasons for that, but I still think that would have been an opportune time to get them out there before signing day. Then you could have Ryan Day on signing day. And I think you could have put all this, behind you. But instead, they're going to get questions this week about Michigan, especially Chip Kelly. So, yes, we will talk to him. I have the schedule pulled up here. Monday, the head coach must be made available from both teams. Monday, Tuesday, the offensive and defensive coordinators and a minimum of 8 student athletes, approximately 4 per day, must be made available to the media. Wednesday, the head coach does a national Zoom from each team, so on and so forth. So you kind of get the idea of the schedule there. But yes, we should finally get to talk to Chip Kelly, and I think it's long overdue. The guy gets paid a lot of money. Both him, all these coaches, frankly, get paid a lot of money, and some of that is to stand up there and answer the questions when you win and when you lose. And I think that we haven't is not a positive reflection on Ohio State. And, I'm not afraid to say that. I think we definitely should have, Ryan Day had to face the music as the head coach. I think the firing squad for Chip Kelly and to some degree Jim Knowles in certain situations, not necessarily the Michigan game, should happen as well. And then Sue also asked, any truth to the rumor we might be going after Quinn Ewers? I saw this come out that Quinn Ewers, was considering coming back for another year of college football because of his draft grades, and there's huge money being thrown at him and this, that, and the other thing. I don't know if any of that's true. I'll just say this. I would be very surprised if Quinn Ewers were to come back to Columbus. I think that it just, the way that things all happened, I don't think I don't think Ohio State needs to go out and get Quinn Ewers. I assume wherever Quinn Ewers, if Ohio State's going to go get a transfer portal quarterback because you need maybe another body, you need a more veteran guy, whatever it is, I think that guy has to be at least up to the possibility that he's not going to win the job if Julian Sayin, who I think most people believe will be Ohio State's starting quarterback, or any of the guys on the roster win the job. So I would be very surprised if Quinn Ewers were to transfer to Ohio State. But in terms of him coming back and playing in another school, I have no idea, in terms of what Quinn Ewers might do. Obviously, he's kind of had an up and down career at Texas after transferring from Ohio State. So, I do think that he's done enough to get drafted, maybe not as high as he would have liked, but, I think there's still a very good quarterback in there. All right, we're going to wrap that up on that note. I want to thank again Bill Bender from the Sporting News and Bill Kurelic from Bucknuts coming on and talking with us. Bill Bender about the college football playoff, mostly Ohio State. We didn't talk as much about the rest of the field as I probably wanted to, but we got a lot of good Ohio State talk, I think, in there, and we'll have more next week. And then Bill Kurelic, obviously the transfer portal stuff and recruiting. Next week, I hope to I have one of our Tennessee guys on later in the week to kind of give assessment of the Volunteers and that side of things, as we usually do. This will probably be Wednesday, Thursday next week, and then we'll be in full game mode. So, obviously, like I said, the schedule next week's a little different, but there'll be tons of stuff. So stay tuned to Bucknuts. Thank you all for tuning in. Cheers, Buckeye fans.